I was at a co-working space yesterday and found myself mesmerized by the guy sitting across from me. He was the absolute picture of modern discipline. He had the noise-canceling headphones, a gallon jug of water, and a Pomodoro timer prominently displayed on his screen. He was attacking his keyboard with this intense, rigid posture, looking like he was physically wrestling with his laptop. To anyone passing by, he looked like the most productive person in the room, a machine of pure willpower. But because I was procrastinating on my own work, I kept watching him. The longer I looked, the more that illusion of productivity started to crack. I noticed that every time his timer went off, he'd let out this heavy, exhausted sigh, looking almost pained. He wasn't actually zoned in. He was constantly fighting the urge to look away, white-knuckling his way through every single sentence. He was treating his work like a battlefield. Then around 2 p.m., the crash happened. He just hit a wall, slumped over in his chair with his eyes glazed, totally spent. It was a stark visual metaphor for the lie we're often sold, that success is about maximum effort and constant force.
He had all the systems and the discipline the gurus talk about, yet he was miserable and chemically depleted. It made me realize that what he was doing wasn't focus, it was friction. And it forces us to ask, why do we worship this kind of exhausting resistance when true mastery actually feels like letting go?
That image you painted it's just so perfect. It's so vivid because it really gets to the heart of this huge misunderstanding we have about focus and about productivity.
Right. It was almost painful to watch.
It is. You use the exact right words. Friction versus flow. Our entire culture, in a way, seems built to glorify that friction. We celebrate the grind, the hustle, this idea that suffering is a prerequisite for success. We see that guy you described, and the automatic thought is, wow, he's so disciplined, he's really trying.
He had all the gear, the timer, the headphones. He had externalized all the compliance, but inside, you could just tell he was in a battle with himself, and it wasn't sustainable.
And that's the core paradox we're really going to dig into today. The traditional model, the one the guy was following, assumes focus has to be forced. It's an act of low power, a constant tight grip. But decades of research into what we call optimal experience show the exact opposite.
That true mastery isn't about holding on tighter.
It's about letting go. It's about falling into focus, surrendering to the task so completely that the sense of self, the part of you that's fighting, just dissolves. So what we're learning is that real deep focus isn't that white-knuckled grip at all. It's actually the art of surrender.
I love that phrase, the art of surrender.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack what that state of effortless focus, what science calls flow, actually is. We need to look at the neurochemistry behind it, why it's so much more powerful than brute force willpower. And then, and this is the really exciting part, we'll look at how leading organizations, innovative educators, and even elite athletes are now actively engineering environments to trigger it. They're moving completely beyond that old, exhausting model of discipline.
So to really understand how to get to this state of surrender or flow, we probably have to start at the beginning. I mean, the idea of being in the zone has been around forever, right?
Yeah.
In sports, art, meditation.
Absolutely. It's a universal human experience. But the person who really formalized it, who brought it into the realm of scientific study, was the Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And his work in the 70s and 80s really laid the groundwork for everything we know now.
And what I find so interesting is that he didn't start by studying, CEOs or super productive people. He started by studying people who were just completely consumed by joy in what they were doing.
That's such a critical distinction. He wasn't looking for productivity hacks. He was studying artists, painters, musicians, sculptors, and he noticed this incredible phenomenon. They would get so absorbed in their work that they would literally forget to eat.
Forget to sleep. Ignore basic needs.
For hours and hours, they lose track of time completely. And he realized this wasn't just them being absent-minded. This was a unique and incredibly powerful state of consciousness, a state of total absorption. He called it the optimal experience.
Okay, so that's the origin. How does that translate into the scientific definition we use today?
The formal definition is that flow is an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best, and this is the crucial part, we perform our best. It's that rare intersection where peak performance and peak experience become the exact same thing.
Performance and well-being aren't in conflict, they're merged.
Exactly. But what's so fascinating about the experience of being in flow is that it's full of contradictions. It's completely paradoxical when you try to describe it.
You mentioned time. That's a big one. People say time flies by, but they also remember moments with this incredible clarity, like it was in slow motion.
That's the transformation of time. It speeds up and stands still at once. And think about the effort. The task is incredibly challenging. It requires immense skill, but the experience feels
Effortless.
Completely effortless. You're in a state of intense, laser-like concentration, but your mind feels relaxed. The inner chatter is gone.
The inner critic just shuts up for a while. That, for me, is the biggest paradox of all the self. You hear people say they lost themselves in their work.
That's it. That's the gateway. Your sense of self-consciousness, the ego, it just vanishes. But at the same time, you feel more present, more engaged, more alive than ever. That temporary silencing of the self is what eliminates the friction we were talking about.
Okay, so let's get into the weeds a bit. Csikszentmihalyi laid out some specifics, right? What are the core components that tell you you're actually in this state?
Yeah, he did. He basically gave us a checklist, which is super useful. There are 6 main psychological characteristics.
A checklist, I like that.
Right. First up is complete concentration on the task at hand. And I mean absolute 100%, no room for anything else concentration.
The zero mental slippage.
Zero. The second is the merger of action and awareness. There's no gap between your intention and your action. You're not thinking about what to do next. You are simply doing.
The third one we touched on, the sense of self vanishing.
Right, the ego goes quiet. Fourth is that strange passage of time we talked about. Fifth is a sense of personal control. And this is a subtle but really important one. It's not about being in control in a rigid way, but it's the feeling of exercising mastery in a difficult situation. It feels good.
And what's the last one?
The 6th is maybe the most profound. He said the experience is autotelic.
Autotelic, what does that mean exactly?
It's from Greek roots. Auto means self, and telos means goal. So the activity is its own goal. It's so enjoyable, so intrinsically rewarding, so euphoric, that you do it for its own sake. Not for a paycheck, not for praise, but just for the sheer joy of doing it.
That's huge. That explains why a coder will stay up all night to solve a problem or a musician practices for 10 hours. It's not about the reward at the end. The work is the reward.
Absolutely. When an activity becomes autotelic, the need for external discipline, for that brute force willpower, it just collapses. The motivation is baked right into the action itself.
So now I want to circle back to our friend in the co-working space, the one who crashed at 2 p.m. The neurobiology here, the actual brain science, can explain exactly why that happened, right?
It explains it perfectly. When we look at the brain, we see that willpower and discipline are incredibly expensive. They're high-cost cognitive functions.
Meaning they burn a lot of fuel.
A lot. They draw from a very finite pool of resources in the brain, primarily your attentional resources and glucose. Every time you force yourself to do something, to resist checking your email, to drag your focus back to a spreadsheet, you're making a withdrawal from that account.
And it's a limited account. You can't just keep making withdrawals all day without consequence.
Precisely. You can't white-knuckle your way through 8 hours of intense cognitive work. It's neurologically impossible. That's why discipline without some kind of intrinsic alignment just becomes friction. And friction leads to depletion. It leads to that 2 p.m. crash you saw.
So willpower depletes energy. What does flow do?
Flow is the metabolic opposite. It doesn't just conserve energy, it actually generates it. It feels invigorating. When the conditions are right, when that challenge meets your skill level, the brain doesn't just calm down. It kicks off this incredible neurochemical symphony.
A performance-enhancing cocktail, basically, but one our own brain produces.
That's a perfect way to put it. The main players in this cocktail are dopamine and norepinephrine.
Okay, so dopamine, that's the pleasure and reward chemical.
Yes, but it's more nuanced than that. In the context of flow, dopamine is released when we recognize patterns, when we link ideas together, when we solve a little piece of a puzzle. It creates this powerful feedback loop that says, hey, this is good, keep going. It makes the work itself feel exciting and compelling.
And norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine works with it to heighten focus and sharpen your attention. It puts you in a state of high alert, but in a positive way. It makes you feel ready and engaged. The combination is what makes the work feel so damn good.
That explains the addictive quality, why you want to keep going.
Yeah.
But what about that feeling of ease, of the inner critic disappearing? That doesn't sound like dopamine.
It isn't. That's where anandamide comes in. And this is, to me, one of the most amazing parts of the whole process. Anandamide is often called the bliss molecule. It's basically the brain's own built-in cannabis.
The brain's own cannabis, okay.
It's a neurotransmitter that has this incredible effect of quieting down the prefrontal cortex specifically, the part that houses our inner critic. Our self-doubt, our fear of failure, all that negative self-talk. Anandamide just turns the volume down on it. It chemically reduces the pain and anxiety that often comes with hard work, which is why it makes intense effort feel like play.
So that feeling of effortlessness, isn't just a story we tell ourselves. It's a real chemical effect happening in the brain.
It's a chemical reality. It allows you to act without the constant running commentary of your own ego. Now, here's where it gets a little counterintuitive. Getting into that deep flow state doesn't always start from a place of Zen-like calm. Sometimes you actually need to trigger a little bit of a fight response.
Wait, hold on. A fight response.
Yeah.
You're saying frustration and annoyance can actually lead to flow. That sounds like the definition of friction.
It sounds like a total contradiction, I know. But think about it. Imagine you're a writer and you're stuck on a sentence, or a coder, and you've hit a bug you can't solve. You feel that jolt of frustration, that annoyance.
That, I can't figure this out feeling.
Exactly. That feeling is accompanied by a little surge of cortisol or epinephrine. Now, if that feeling becomes overwhelming anxiety, you're out. You'll quit. But if it's just enough to make you say, damn it, I'm going to solve this, it can actually drive your attention deeper into the problem. It forces you to lean in.
So you're using that initial stress as a launch pad.
You're using it as a match to light the fire. That initial intensity burns through the friction and can actually propel you into the deep focus phase that precedes flow. It's the critical difference between being frustrated and giving up versus being frustrated and doubling down.
That completely reframes how I think about frustration. It's not a stop sign, it could be a doorway.
If you handle it right, yes, but it's a delicate balance. And that brings us to what is probably the single most important trigger for flow, the one Csikszentmihalyi built his whole model around.
The challenge skill balance.
The challenge skill balance. This is the non-negotiable gateway. You can think of flow as this narrow channel. On one side, you have boredom. On the other, you have anxiety.
So if the task is too easy for your skill level, your mind just wanders off.
Yeah.
There's no challenge to hold your attention.
Right. You slip into boredom or apathy. Your brain just says, I don't need to be here for this, and it checks out. But if the task is way too hard, if the challenge dramatically exceeds your skills...
You're in the anxiety zone. You freeze up.
Exactly. The perceived difficulty is so high that your prefrontal cortex, that self-critical part, just goes into overdrive. You get flooded with anxiety, and complex thinking becomes impossible. Flow can only happen in that perfect sweet spot in the middle.
Has anyone ever tried to, quantify that sweet spot? Is there a magic number for how much is a stretch it should be?
It's funny you ask. Researchers who study this in elite performers have actually tried to pin it down. The general consensus is that the optimal challenge is about 4 to 5% greater than your current skill level.
4 to 5%, that's incredibly specific.
It is, but it's also very practical. It's enough to demand your full attention. It forces you to stretch. But it's not so much that it triggers that anxiety response. It keeps you on the edge of your abilities, which is exactly where the brain needs to be to stay engaged.
Can you give me a real-world example of what that 4% looks like?
Sure. Let's say you're a weightlifter and your max deadlift is 300 pounds. Trying to lift 400 pounds is going to lead to injury and anxiety. But trying to lift 312 pounds, that's a 4% increase. It's going to require every ounce of your focus and strength, but it's achievable.
Or for a musician, practicing a song at 100 beats per minute, trying to play it at 104.
Perfect example. It forces you to sharpen your skills, to develop new pathways without snapping your focus. That constant marginal stretching is what builds mastery and keeps the brain locked in.
So getting that balance right is key. But there are other factors, right? Csikszentmihalyi and his colleague Nakamura laid out 5 vital conditions for achieving flow.
They did, and these are things you can consciously engineer into your work. The first one we've touched on, the task needs to be intrinsically rewarding. The motivation has to come from within. You have to want to do it for its own sake.
The autotelic experience.
Exactly. Second, you need clear goals and a sense of progress. You have to know what you're trying to accomplish, even if it's just for the next 5 minutes. The brain needs a target to aim for.
That makes sense. What's the third?
This one is absolutely critical. Clear and immediate feedback. You need to know, moment by moment, whether what you're doing is working or not.
Okay, I want to pause on that one, because in most jobs, feedback is the opposite of immediate. You get an annual review or feedback on a project weeks after you've finished it.
And that's precisely why most office work actively prevents flow. That kind of delayed evaluative feedback pulls you out of the experience. Flow requires feedback that is integrated into the activity itself.
Like a video game player, they get instant feedback, a sound, a score, a visual cue, the second they make a move.
A perfect analogy. Or a surgeon who can see and feel the results of their actions in real time. Or a writer who just knows when a sentence lands perfectly. That seamless, continuous loop of action and feedback is what allows for that merger of action and awareness we talked about.
Okay, so intrinsic reward, clear goals, immediate feedback. The fourth is the challenge skill balance we just discussed. What's the fifth?
Intense focus on the present moment, which means you have to build a fortress against distraction.
This gets back to the foundation of it all. You can have the perfect task, but if your environment is chaotic, it's all for nothing.
It's a non-starter. Flow only shows up when your attention is completely in the here and now. So we have to talk about the practicalities of eliminating friction from your environment.
And part of that is understanding the brain's own rhythms, right? It's not a machine you can just run for 8 hours straight.
Not at all. The brain operates in cycles, known as Ultradian Rhythms. For focus, the optimal cycle is somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes of deep, uninterrupted concentration. If you can honor that cycle, you create the ideal window for flow to emerge.
So the goal isn't to work longer, but to work deeper within those 90-minute windows.
Exactly. And that means treating distractions not as minor annoyances, but as catastrophic interruptions. Research on software developers, for example, showed that after being knocked out of a flow state by an email or a tap on the shoulder, it took them a minimum of 15 minutes to get back into that deep focus.
15 minutes. If you get interrupted 3 or 4 times in the morning, you've lost an hour of your most productive time.
You've lost the hour, and you've probably destroyed any chance of achieving flow for that entire session. This is why you have to be ruthless. Turn off the phone, close the email client, signal to everyone around you that this time is sacred.
So you create the quiet space. But what about the internal friction, the inertia, the I don't want to start feeling?
That's where ritual comes in. You can train your brain. By creating a specific pre-work ritual, maybe it's making a specific cup of tea, putting on a certain album, spending 2 minutes tidying your desk, you create a powerful cue.
A trigger.
A trigger that tells your brain, okay, it's time to go deep now. Over time, that ritual lowers the activation energy required to start. It reduces the friction of getting started, which is often the biggest hurdle of all.
This is all fascinating in theory, but I really want to talk about where the rubber meets the road. We're seeing these principles move out of the lab and into the real world, starting with corporate culture. Especially in places like Silicon Valley, they're moving beyond the hustle culture model.
It's a massive shift. A great example is the story of a senior back-end engineer, let's call him Elias. He was the poster child for the old model. He was famous for his 4 a.m. commits, pulling all-nighters fueled by caffeine and pressure.
Hero engineer, burning himself out for the company.
And that's how he was seen. But the reality was he was miserable, he was chemically depleted, and honestly, the code he was writing in that state was often buggy and had to be fixed later. The whole system was built on friction.
So what changed? The company didn't just tell him to, find a better work-life balance. They changed the system.
They changed the entire architecture of how they worked based on these principles of organizational neuroscience. They implemented deep work zones. For 3 hours every afternoon, from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., all meetings were banned. All internal chat tools were silenced.
They created a company-wide sanctuary for focus.
They did. And they actively encouraged people to work in those 90-minute sprints and then take real disconnected breaks, walk away from the screen, go outside.
And what happened to Elias when the company started protecting his focus instead of demanding his constant availability?
It was a game changer. He'd been wrestling with this massive, complex server latency problem for weeks, just banging his head against the wall. When he was finally given the uninterrupted space to just sink into the problem without pressure, he relaxed. He stopped trying to force a solution. And in that state of flow, the entire elegant, multi-layered solution just visualized itself in his mind.
A breakthrough that never would have happened in the old friction-based system.
Never. It was an innovation that came from surrender, not from struggle. And this isn't just a feel-good story. There's a powerful business case for this. McKinsey did a huge, decade-long study on top executives.
I think I know the one you're talking about. The results are just staggering.
They are. They found that when those executives were operating in a state of flow, they were up to 500% more productive than when they weren't.
500%. I mean, let that number sink in.
Yeah.
That means 1 day a week in a flow state gets you more done than an entire 5-day week of slogging through it.
It completely reframes the conversation. It's not about working more hours. It's about creating more high-quality, flow-driven hours. Organizations that get this are unlocking a level of performance and innovation that their competitors simply can't match.
So we see it transforming the corporate world. But what about education? I mean, so much of traditional schooling seems designed to prevent flow bells ringing, constant interruptions, high-stakes testing that fuels anxiety.
It's a huge problem. You've just described what we might call the lecture hall paradox. And it's perfectly illustrated by the story of a student named Maya who was taking organic chemistry.
OChem, the classic fear-inducing high-friction course.
Exactly. And Maya was the model student. She had the color-coded notes, the flashcards, she pulled the all-nighters, she had discipline in spades. But she was terrified of failing, and that high anxiety completely pushed her out of the flow channel. It actually blocked the neural pathways she needed for complex problem solving.
So her dedication was actually working against her. She was just practicing compliance, not really learning.
She was studying to pass the tests, not to understand the chemistry. Her professor noticed this pattern and realized the problem wasn't the students, it was the environment. So he completely redesigned the labs. He turned them from rigid, follow-the-steps exercises into open-ended investigative mysteries.
He introduced an element of curiosity and play.
And he carefully calibrated the challenge. The goal was no longer just to get the right answer. The goal was the process of discovery itself. And for Maya, the shift was profound. She stopped worrying about the grade, and she just got lost in the puzzle. She lost track of time. And she finally synthesized this complex compound, not by remembering facts, but by doing chemistry. The knowledge became part of her because the experience was autotelic.
So for educators listening, how can they start to build these kinds of flow-friendly environments?
There are 5 really practical interventions. 1, provide the right scaffolding. Give students ways to adjust the difficulty of a task so it's always in that 4% sweet spot for them.
So they have agency over the challenge level.
Exactly. 2, tap into intrinsic motivation. Turn a boring history lesson into a detective case. Make it fun. 3, embrace student choice. Let them pursue projects they're actually passionate about. 4, minimize distractions. Argue for longer class periods, fewer interruptions. And 5, teach metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Help them recognize when they're learning effectively and when they're just spinning their wheels. Help them build their own internal feedback mechanisms so they can stay in that flow channel themselves.
Okay, from the classroom to the absolute pinnacle of human performance. Elite sports. This is where the zone isn't just a happy accident. It's a trainable, repeatable state.
It absolutely is. Consider the case of an Olympic archer, Kenji, who was suffering from something called target panic.
Target panic. It's not a physical issue, right? It's all in the head.
Entirely. He was trying too hard. He was consciously trying to control his arm to force the arrow to hit the bullseye. That conscious effort, that noisy prefrontal cortex, was creating so much friction that his body would freeze up.
And the more he tried to force it, the worse it got.
Of course. So his coach did something completely counterintuitive. He told Kenji to stop trying to hit the bullseye. He told him to completely let go of the outcome.
What did he have him focus on instead?
His internal state. His breath. The feeling of the bowstring on his fingers. They hooked him up to biofeedback sensors and just had him practice until he could consistently get his heart rate into a state of relaxed coherence.
So he wasn't training his aim. He was training his nervous system.
Yeah.
Trusting that his years of physical practice would take over if he could just get his mind out of the way.
That is precisely it. He learned to bypass the noisy, critical part of his brain and let his highly trained subconscious do its job. And we can now see this on a brain scan. In athletes, this flow state is marked by a very specific signature. Strong theta waves in the front of the brain for focus, balanced with just the right amount of alpha waves across the rest of the brain.
Alpha waves, those are associated with wakeful relaxation.
Yes. They oscillate between 8 and 12 hertz. It's the perfect rhythm of being calm but also hyper-aware, and athletes can be trained to produce more of them on demand. Studies have shown soccer players boosting their alpha activity by over 30%, leading to better split-second decisions. And for archers like Kenji, an incredible 70% of Olympians have learned to tap into this state on command.
On command, that's incredible. What are the techniques they're using?
It's a whole suite of tools called psychological skills training, or PST. It involves things like training athletes to develop a harmonious passion, to love the process of their sport, not just the winning. It involves volitional strategies, like having a pre-planned mantra for when things get tough.
And I've heard tennis players talk about using specific breathing routines under pressure.
That's an associative attentional technique. It's a pre-programmed routine, like a 4-breath sequence, that acts as a trigger to immediately bring them back into that calm alpha wave state, even at match point.
I also read that music is being used in some really advanced ways here.
It is. It's not just a pump-up playlist anymore. It's being used as a training partner. An athlete will listen to music designed to induce focus, and the tech can detect when their mind wanders and subtly change the music, which acts as a gentle cue to bring their attention back.
So it's like interval training, but for your focus muscle.
It's exactly that. High-intensity interval training for the brain. Every time you bring your focus back, you're doing a rep. You're building the mental muscle you need to sustain flow when the stakes are highest.
This is all so applicable. Let's bring it into another domain that so many of us struggle with: writing, or any kind of creative work. Writer's block feels like the ultimate form of cognitive friction.
It really is. And the good news is, writer's block is almost always a process problem, not a creativity problem. It happens when people try to do everything at once. They try to generate ideas, structure them, and polish the language simultaneously.
The dreaded tyranny of the blank page and the need for the perfect first sentence.
Right. And it's paralyzing. The solution is to decouple those processes using a method called layered writing. You separate the different cognitive tasks so they don't interfere with each other.
Okay, break that down for me. What are the layers?
3 simple layers. Layer 1 is just the action, the raw material, get the facts down, who, what, when, where, why. It's supposed to be ugly, no style allowed, just get the information out of your head and onto the page.
So you're just building the skeleton first.
Exactly. Then layer 2 is the meat. You go back and add all the data, the supporting evidence, the quotes, the statistics. You make the argument robust. Style is still not the priority.
And only then, once all of that is in place.
Only then do you move to layer 3, which is style. Now you can focus purely on the polish, the flair, the jokes, the rhythm of the sentences. You're editing, not creating from scratch, which is a much less taxing mental process.
That feels so much more manageable. You also mentioned a pre-flow ritual for writers.
Yes. The best way for a writer to start their day is to edit what they wrote the day before.
Why is that so effective?
Because editing is a form of pattern recognition. You're spotting awkward phrases, tightening sentences. This process releases little hits of dopamine, which primes your brain for focus. It gives you momentum and a feeling of accomplishment before you have to face the terror of the blank page.
And it all comes back to giving the brain a clear path.
Always. The brain is a path-finding machine. You have to give it a starting point, A, and an ending point, B, before you begin. If you know the conclusion you're writing toward, your brain will work in the background, making connections automatically. The friction comes when the brain has no destination in mind.
These ideas are now being baked into the very structure of how we lead and manage complex projects. Let's talk about this shift from traditional project management to what you call neurocognitive project management.
Right, or Neurocog PM. Traditional project management, with its Gantt charts and rigid plans, was built for a world that was relatively predictable. It just breaks down completely in today's volatile, uncertain environment.
Because it doesn't account for the human brain under pressure.
It completely ignores the cognitive and emotional load on the project manager. Neurocog PM is about shifting from just managing the project to actively engineering the project manager's brain to be able to handle the chaos.
So what does that look like in practice?
It's built on 3 pillars. First, neuroplasticity, training the brain to be more flexible, to rewire itself in response to new information. Second, advanced flow state training for leaders so they can stay immersed and make high-quality decisions without burning out. And third, the concept of anti-fragility.
Anti-fragility, I love that word. It's not just being resilient and bouncing back from stress.
It's about getting stronger from stress. A Neurocog PM-trained leader sees an unexpected project failure not as a disaster, but as a source of information, an opportunity to learn and adapt. They use the stress as fuel to make the project and their own cognitive architecture more robust than it was before.
Given how much we're integrating neuroscience with management, it seems inevitable that AI would enter the picture. What does the future look like with neuro-AI?
Neuro-AI is about designing AI systems that are aligned with how the human brain actually works, how we perceive, pay attention, and make decisions. And let me be clear, this is not about replacing the human manager.
It's about augmenting them.
It's about building a mental amplifier. The AI's job is to reduce cognitive overload. It sifts through the mountains of data, spots the critical patterns, and only flags what the human needs to see, allowing the project manager to stay in a flow state and focus on high-level strategic decisions.
So the AI handles the friction so the human can stay in flow.
That's the goal. We'll see AI systems that can predict risks based on neuroscientific models of human error, or simulate complex scenarios to help a leader see the optimal path without having to mentally wrestle with a dozen different options. It's about creating a true cognitive partnership between human and machine.
We've covered a lot, from organizational design to AI. Let's bring it all the way back down to the individual. How do we, on a daily basis, manage that internal voice of resistance, that friction that just says, I don't feel like it?
The first step is to recognize that the voice is biological. It's not a moral failing. Our bodies are designed for homeostasis, to conserve energy. Starting a hard task is a demand for energy, so of course your body's initial reaction is resistance.
So how do you override that biological default?
You have to operate with two different mental systems. Think of it as your immediate user interface, or UI, versus your long-term operating system, or OS.
Okay, the UI versus the OS. I like that analogy.
Your UI is your in-the-moment self. It's the part that feels tired, hungry, bored, the part that wants the easy dopamine hit of social media. The OS is your strategic long-term self, the one who knows your goals and is committed to them. To get anything done, you have to let the OS be in charge. We call this working for the boss.
The boss is your higher self, your alter ego.
Exactly. The boss is the one who writes the to-do list the night before when you're thinking clearly and strategically. The UI is the employee who shows up the next morning and says, I don't feel like doing this. And the boss has one simple, unbreakable rule.
What's the rule?
If it goes on the list, it gets done. Period. You never, ever break your word to yourself.
Why is that so powerful in reducing friction?
Because your brain is an efficiency machine. If it knows with 100% certainty that quitting or compromising is not an option, it stops wasting energy on that internal debate. The should I or shouldn't I argument just disappears. All that mental energy that was being wasted on friction can now be directed toward the task itself, which makes entering a state of flow infinitely easier.
This has been such a paradigm shift. I think what I'm taking away from this entire deep dive is that we've been sold a faulty model of success. It isn't about more force, more willpower, more gritting your teeth. It's about intelligent design.
It is. It's about creating the conditions, both internally and externally, for this natural state of alignment to emerge. The goal isn't to wrestle your focus into submission. It's to clear the path, remove the friction, and let the powerful current of flow carry you forward.
It seems like mastery isn't about controlling your focus, but about letting your focus carry you.
That's the essence of it. And in today's world, clarity isn't just an intellectual concept anymore. It's a neurocognitive one. Whether you're leading a team, teaching a student, or competing at the highest level, true peak performance comes from removing the blocks, the friction. When we stop trying so hard to focus, we finally find that we can.